Thank you. So it is my great pleasure now to introduce our guest speaker for today's meeting, Julianne Parkinson. She was appointed the CEO of the Global Centre for Modern Ageing in April this year, 2018. Previously, Julianne was the Executive Director of the Office of the Economic Development Board, an independent advisory body to the South Australian Government on economic issues and initiatives. It was in this role that Julianne led the Ageing Well program of work, including the idea creation for the Shaping the Future of South Australia Ageing Well program, which concluded in 2016. And that was an initiative to better understand and change the perception of ageing, an entrepreneurial challenge focused on the new sector market 2017 and the Ageing Well Revolution International Conference held in Australia in 2017, which included the nationwide entrepreneurial challenge. And Julianne co-authored the blueprint strategy for the creation of the first dedicated Australian-based modern ageing living laboratory, which she'll tell you more about during her talk. Julianne has more than 25 years' experience, including, without giving away her age, including executive leadership of developing and leading large-scale sector development roles with global financial and management consulting firms KPMG and EY, including Regional Director of Strategic Growth Markets. Julianne has undertaken projects across Southeast Asia and specialises in strategic planning, business development and complex stakeholder engagement. Julianne is a fellow and a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, a director of Brand South Australia and a board member of the UniSA Postgraduate Advisory Board. So join with me in welcoming Julianne.
Thank you, Sonia, and to Robin, to all Rotarians here today and guests. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you, to share lunch and a conversation that has been centred in South Australia now for a few years and is making its way to a broader community to evoke change in a very positive way. You know, ageing's a really interesting thing. We've never... in the company of which we're in. And, you know, we've never had this many people on the planet ever before of this size and magnitude of an ageing population. We've certainly not had them of this persuasion, not of this education, not of their health, not of their inspiration and, as I mentioned earlier, aspirations for themselves about what they expect out of life throughout life's full course. And, you know, it's interesting to reflect that in 1950, the average white male in Australia retired at 65 and died at 67. So that was, at the time, a very convenient model for government of the day. However, humanity being what it is, through advancements in health, in hygiene, education, we now live in a far different world. And for those people who were born in 1950, now have the likelihood of living not just into their 70s, their 80s and their 90s, and as we're seeing now into 100s. And I reflect back on the beautiful young men who spoke for us today. Their life expectancy and the life expectancy, gentlemen, should you choose to have children, could be well into 120. So it's a very interesting time in which we live. And so some of the statistics around South Australia, why should we be playing a role in ageing? Well, we know that despite the fact that we have people on the planet into their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and 100s, it seemed wrong to me. It seemed wrong that ageing is considered to be a social and an economic burden, rather than seen for what it really is. Look at the skill sets, the insights, the talents and the contribution older people can play in society if only society would send out the message that there's an expectation, and not only an expectation, we're here to enable and support you. How differently our community would look. How different it would be if we imagined that middle age or midlife wasn't 35 to 62. But if your midlife was considered in your own minds, in your own hearts, to be 35 to 80. And there's no age on it actually, but just for, I've worked in accounting firms, so I'm a bit fixated by numbers. But if you were to imagine that, how differently you would treat your life, how differently you would treat yourself around your investment in you in your 60s, 70s and 80s. And so yet in society at the moment, we know from all the studies that people often feel, those that maybe aren't as privileged as those in this room today, who are leading meaningful lives and lives of contribution. I mean, Rotary speaks to the heart of the very thing we exist for, if only to allow others to feel that they should have an opportunity to access these sorts of communities, rather than considering themselves to feel less relevant, less capable, and less considered. And that's not their view of themselves, it's the view that they feel others impart on them. We're here to help change that. And why not South Australia? We have the largest ageing demographic on the mainland in per capita basis. We're well placed, we are a home of innovation and startups. We understand the need to not only improve the lives of citizens in South Australia, but just imagine if we get the strategy right and the IP and the business models, how we can improve not just lives for citizens here, but we can create models and export opportunities for growth and jobs that extend way beyond our nation, but over to Southeast Asia. And it's interesting that every second, someone in the world, 2 people are turning 60 right now. So by the time I finish this conversation with you today, there are more people over 60 than before. It's a ticking of a clock, and it's important that we make every second count. So about us, the Global Centre for Modern Ageing was established, as mentioned in the introduction, in 2018, but what I'd like to share with you is a little bit of the backstory, a little bit of the reason why we've created this organisation and the work that's gone before us and the journey ahead. And that since that time, we have over 1,000 industry players. And as was mentioned a little bit earlier, you know, we had the Shaping the Future of South Australia program, and the whole intent of that was to say that ageing is a global sector phenomenon around the world, right? And yet we consider it often to be around aged care and retirement villages as being the industry sectors that are most fascinated by older people. But think about food. There is not enough nutritional food that is age appropriate on the market. And there's not a person here that wouldn't argue about packaging, right? About the way in which you can read the labels and understand the content. It's as frustrating. And yet we solve this problem for older people, we satisfy the world, right? Nobody's comfortable with packaging right now. We've all been on those flights where the biscuit packet, you can't open it. It's passed down to, aisle 17D because the fellow there's worked out and he's opening everybody's packets around him. We want to see that change. We want to remove the isolation, and we think food plays a really important role there. So tourism, finance, how do we allow people to have equity and release equity out of their assets in a way in which they choose? Not as restricted by the regulatory forces that we have right now. So to challenge the status quo and to improve it. So as I said, food, finance, education, skills and training for us to be contributors in life, to continue to contribute. And why is it? Why is it that at 65, society no longer makes a request to us to continue to be makers in society rather than takers? And we know that Australians don't want to be takers in the main. They really do want to continue to contribute. And for every time somebody retires and they're given a farewell and the drink and they walk out the door, it just amazes me. It amazes me that exec-co company groups get together the next morning and they say, we've got 2 problems in our organisation. Oh, what's that, Larry? Well, we've got a culture. We've got a problem with our culture. And we've got a problem with workforce planning and completion because we don't have enough talented people. And yet yesterday we said goodbye to a really dedicated engineer, chemical engineer perhaps, accountant, HR person, clerical staff. It doesn't matter. We let good, talented, educated people walk out the door and not a system that yet has a feedback loop to allow them to engage in life again. So we're encouraging of encore careers. And by that I don't mean working another 40 hours because the tax man says. That's not our intent. That's not our intent. But to allow for portfolio lives that many of you perhaps in this room have the opportunity that you've created for yourselves, either through your networks or through your own ability to pull yourself up by your own bootlaces. You know, you have the resilience in this room to create an extension of your life in a way that gives you purpose. We want to allow those and give access to those who don't have that at their ready, the opportunity to gather that. So it was the Shaping the Future of 1,500 people gathered together. In fact, it's no coincidence that it was August the 31st in 2016 where we met, and it was a sold-out event. It was a freezing cold day, by the way, not as beautiful as today. It was a sold-out event, sold out, and people had come from all persuasions to understand what is this demographic? And it was a conversation that was led out by good work from Bernard Salter, well-regarded and celebrated public demographer, and many others that came together, leaders from not-for-profit, citizens at the centre of everything we do. So how do we co-design and co-create this future? Well, baby boomers are doing it for themselves, right, in the words of the song. Baby boomers are doing it for themselves. They will not tolerate the lives of their parents or their grandparents. They're pretty comfortable with spending the inheritance of their children. And hence we're seeing the changes in the consumption patterns. And there are a lot of myths out there. There are myths that older people don't like to learn. That's not true. That's not true. We've mastered adult learning, but we haven't mastered the curiosity around older adult learning. There's a job to take on. So that work and the call out meant that to date we have 1,000 people that organically through the last few years have come together, as I mentioned, from all sectors and all parts of South Australia and nationally to take part in the conversation. So our vision for our organisation, as you see here, is to be recognised as a world leader where South Australia and indeed Australia plays a nation-leading response to the ageing phenomenon. And that is in a way of helping to co-create and co-design better products or the services with the input and the direction of the very older consumer by which the entrepreneur seeks to satisfy. And we'll do that by creating an ecosystem. So it's like all new sectors, if they haven't existed before, in the outlying areas that will become, the new form. If it's more than aged care and retirement villages, then where do they go to find out the information? How do they come together to brainstorm ideas? And where do they go to execute on their better products and services? And we're being contacted as a small company that we've just started right now. The size of the projects and the calibre of the institutions. Leading media companies have reached out. We perhaps don't understand the older reader like we should. Not really. I mean, we now give digital content. We know they're on their devices. In fact, as organisations, some of them can track what you're reading or digesting, but they can't track the experience. They don't know if you're happy. They don't know if the content's right. Do you like the language? How do you feel about the device you're working with? How could we make that better? And people who might utilise gardening equipment. What do we do to make a person with right-hand arthritis engage in gardening? Just by way of a couple of examples. And some of the statistics, as we mentioned earlier, we're living longer, but the consumption patterns are really interesting. People are spending a lot more in their 60. In fact, the numbers are that people in 65, it regresses at around 80 or 85. I won't go through all of the data here, but, the consumption patterns are up as high as some of the younger people because for many, not all, of course, there are people who don't have education, they're not paying for school fees, they don't necessarily have mortgages. So they are spending, but are you finding your dining experience the one you really seek and want? I thought it was wonderful, just wonderful when WOMAD a few years ago realised, and creative industries are at the heart of this in two forms. The first being participation of older people. And they realised there was a part of the audience that weren't coming out to those 3 days at the Botanical Gardens, where at that time they gave you the choice. You could stand up for 3 days and enjoy the musical festival, and you could lie down on the grass and enjoy the musical festival. And some bright person said, well, what about we introduce a third option? We create some chairs. We put them under shaded trees. Well, I tell you what, you don't have to be 85 to think that's a very good idea, right? So they started to think more, and then they put more mobile bathrooms around the area and a bit more of the food. And all of a sudden, a whole new generation of groupies who love bands and music were coming out with their friends and their grandchildren. So it doesn't mean building a $200 million stadium to do things differently. It's just putting them at the heart of your strategy and not to say, oh, well, sales are down, let's send the senior card people, a discount. That's not what we're about. There's got to be more work in it than that. And we also know through the housing numbers, which I haven't got for you there, but the more consumer choice that we have, that the older people are, the more that they're living on their own or in ones and twos. And so there's a whole issue there around how do we free up, as you would have had discussions about before, I suspect, in this audience, conversations about property and planning laws to free up assets and land dwellings so that we can reconfigure them. We know that older people, anybody of any age, over a period of time, actually often prefer to live within the same precinct. They don't really want to move 10 or 12 kilometres away just because that's where the new asset sits. They like their bus routes, they certainly like their friendships and their shopping precincts. So how do we help shift the dial? So where do we fit in? We provide research and this co-design of a life lab, which I'm so excited to share with you with today, and I'm going to invite each and every one of you to come down and have a look at this lab next time you're at Tonsley. It's great fun. But we're involved in the new research that informs. We're about evidence-based findings and shifting and myth-busting with evidence around what's happening, and creating research knowledge not just for the academic community, but as importantly for entrepreneurs to understand how to understand this market and tap into their needs and wants effectively. And data analysis, so we'd all be aware of big data and what role it plays. I mentioned earlier around the eco-map, around how we help organisations or individuals understand where to go next for support. And we will be forming a business advisory service or a consulting service. And whilst we're not really there to do all of the creation of the new world in terms of advising, we will help people tap into the right resources, be it Austrade, or be it a not-for-profit, or be it a Big Four consulting firm or a small consultant. And we see so much talent of independents that are out there. You know, entrepreneurs, the largest number of entrepreneurs, both in America and Australia, is over the age of 54, right? Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? And what's that about? Well, you know, they've got the wisdom, they've got the insights, they've got the chutzpah, and so they are in a good position to be making a better chance of a new world. From an employment point of view, you could also argue, and I think it's reasonable to say this too, that current employment models fail them. And there is an ageist society that looks disparagingly, if not disparagingly, at least in a reduced light, around older people. So they're creating their own new futures. There's an opportunity there to shift the employment models and the view. We've never had fourth generational employment before. So we don't know what it's like. We've never really tested it. What does it do for productivity? What does it do for culture? I suspect, and we will await the evidence, a lot more positive than anything else. Let's explore it. And advocacy, so we're the positive voice of people in their 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, empowering people to have their say in their futures, better products and services. And we don't seek to force people off the couch who prefer to be home more days than not. If that's their preferred life, we're not prescriptive at all. But if there's just one part in any of those people, just one notion that it's a little bit about, if only I could, I only would if I could, or I don't really know what's out there, then we do exist for those people. And we're located at Tonsley, so we had to think about how are we going to put this business, this living laboratory, which is about co-designing and co-creating. And for all of us that have, seen focus groups or had some exposure, they've been running since the 1960s, since advertising firms were formed. And whilst they bring about engagement and often a nice cup of tea and a sandwich, they haven't always, or necessarily all that often, really delivered in market the expectation of change that those end users, if I can use that term, consumers or patrons, deliver. So what's been missing, because we will sit here and they'll say, yes, I really would like that cup. And if it came in red, that'd be wonderful, I'd spend 15%, and they leave the focus group, not really remembering that and certainly not actioning the two things the entrepreneur was super counting on. So we knew that if we were to build a living laboratory that really brought the latest of audio and video capturing into place and brought together a way that trained citizens, people, to be better and more effective co-designers, and we brought together the right leadership that's doing this at a worldwide level, at the highest form of a worldwide level, how different South Australia's contribution could be. We realised that in our work, they said, well, if you're going to build a demonstration unit where people come down and do the trialling and the testing from wherever they are, it's really important that you're in an environment of collaboration and innovation. You need a precinct, right? You need small and medium-sized entrepreneurs working with large organisations. And it's useful if you have a university, but not exclusive arrangements with them. And vet sector training's really important. Skills, and how do we help people provide better skills and training in-home for people. So we walked away and realised there wasn't really much work for us to do there. Tonsley existed. And so we simply took a space at Tonsley. And as you'll see there, as for many of you would remember, it was the old Mitsubishi site and now has, as it boasts, as many people there now as when it was in full operation. 1,500 people are located at Tonsley, not including the students of Flinders University Tonsley and not including the TAFE students. And I'm really loving being around all those young tradies. They're a lot of fun. And they love the fact that they get to see and maybe have empathy, as our young gentleman did today, around a world that they want to understand, but they need to find a safe and a respectful place in which they can learn and develop what's required. So we've built this Life Lab. It's a Scandinavian in field. We've got the wallpaper wrapped around the outside because we wanted to send a message to the precinct that we do it a little differently at Tonsley. And we've built in a kitchen because it's quite difficult to bump it in and out. It's one of those bits of hardware that you really need the gas working well, right, for all the obvious reasons. But it's a fully operating kitchen, and in that room there is 19 cameras and sensors. Phenomenal. So much fun. And everything we do is with the complete permission of the citizens. They know exactly what they're signing up for, what's going to be taking place. We have the ethics and the contracts and the consent forms, and people can walk out at any time, but they will never be put in a situation they're not aware of. We've been very careful in that. And I'm pleased and so proud that we've been able to hire Vera Mustonen, who's moved from Helsinki. So the Livable Cities program of living labs where people co-design, this is quite new. You know, it's in the last 20 years. And in fact, I think it was just around 15 or 18 years ago, there were 20 life labs in the world under the European network of living labs. Now there's 384. That was the count in November. And that's just under their domain. But we sit outside of universities. We are enterprise-driven, citizen-led. That's what we do. So there are other labs inside universities, but they're locked away within all of the strategic and governance requirements of that. And yet we've kept everything to the highest order of requirements and approvals. So we have a place where people come and we induct them. So we've got a training. We've created Australia's best content, process and methodology for training people to be co-designers. So they come in more empowered and more skilled. So to more than just share their hot or cold, bad or good words, to have deep reflection as to why, and particularly in food is a good example, why people have childhood memories of food. And perhaps in superannuation, and let's not go there today because there probably isn't too much time to cover that. But at $2.3 trillion, what's the understanding of that older depositor? There's perhaps some work to be done there. And yet linked to that is your childhood memories of saving and safety and security, right? So these are some of our people that have been working in our pilot. We've been commissioning the lab over the last 40 days, and we have another trial tomorrow. We've had a food project. We've had assistive devices for those of you here in the allied industries to allow people. This was a product that was used before for high-performance athletes. They've reconfigured it for the needs of older people who might need to do some rehab at home. And so it's technology-enabled. And some of our projects don't have the cameras or the sensors at all. You know, we have conversations. It's everything from idea creation all the way through to creating your first prototype of your product or service. Prototype 1, Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, out to commercialisation, out to market on the shelves. And then for those that may have not used our process and their product isn't working to the satisfaction of their board or their investors, how can they bring the project back in and bring it in, and we let the learned people being their ultimate consumers. So we have a group that are signing up on databases to be part of projects with us, and they share what sort of projects they've got the opportunity. It's on our website if they want to be part of a call-out community to be part of this trialling and testing. I think that's sort of the main bit there was around Vera being with us from Helsinki, been running the Livable Cities projects in Helsinki, bringing that expertise here on a visa. For 4 years, she's brought her family and her 2 children and her husband, which is fantastic. They complain the ocean's too warm. Yeah, that's the first time, right? And also, as I mentioned to you, the training of the program. Adelaide University has informed our cameras and our sensors. UniSA has assisted with the content and the process to train older people. And Flinders University are involved in helping us bring together entrepreneurs. So it truly is a collaborative project and one we're really proud to share with you. So if there's anything that we can do to assist you, if you'd like to see it, we're having a launch. It's not been advertised just yet, but it'll be on October the 11th at 10:30 in the morning. We so welcome you to join and be part of the celebration with us. Thank you.
Perfect. Come back, Julianne. We've got time for a few questions. So if you want to, and who's going to be my roving mic person? There we go. Awesome.
Hello. Thank you. I have a 95-year-old mother-in-law who gives me heaps.
I'm pleased.
But she has great trouble with packaging. And this, I know my mother was still alive. She had, even in hospital, she couldn't even open half the food they served her while she was in hospital.
Yes.
And what is your group doing about trying to educate manufacturers about improving their packaging so that older people can open it and use it?
Oh, thank you. Look, great question, and I couldn't agree with you more. We haven't been able to create every theme in that lab. We can manifest a bedroom of tomorrow, and we have night vision, which allows for falls. But the kitchen was built for that very purpose. To test not only the nutritional aspect of the food and the quality of it, but to make packaging more functional, to your point, but also make it a bit sassy. It doesn't have to look like it's sitting there. What is it about packaging? I mean, if you go down the supermarket aisles, if you look at pet food, it's all in older brackets. Long-haired dogs, short-haired dogs, young dogs, medium dogs, older. You look at baby food. There's aisles of it everywhere. And yet you're only a baby for 2 years. We living in this life, we have 30 years of this food to consume and improve. So the answer to your question, sir, is that we're doing a call out to organisations who are responsible for packaging. And they are invited to, bring in trials and tests, and we bring in older people, whatever age, and maybe it's not about age, it's really just about conditions or positions that they have, and trial and test, and let them give the feedback to the packaging company. And when we do that, not only will your mother have a better life, I will have a better life. So, yes.
Thanks, Julianne. What's your structure and funding model, and how do you operate and how do you get your money?
Yes, thank you. So we have been granted $10 million from the state government of South Australia, and we have already funded the lab itself, so the lab's built now, and some of that money has begun to be spent, obviously, in the recruitment and the governance and the early trials. So the money is there until June 2021. The governance is that we have, so we're there on a funding agreement with the government of the day, and we're very much, though, about, we see this as seed funding. The people who will benefit the most if we do this properly are not just the citizens, it's the entrepreneurs who have been given a leg up, right, a significant leg up. That laboratory, because you've got the best trained citizens that have been picked and selected for what you need, and the fact we've got the audio and the video capturing and the data analytics, when you put all of that together inside a friendly and conducive and respectful culture and environment, three things are going to happen for that entrepreneur. One is that you're either going to have more confidence than ever before, far more than a focus group, that your idea is a winner and accelerate it to market. The second is that we shut down ideas really quickly with more evidence than ever before. So when an entrepreneur can sometimes love their own idea more than they love their customers, right? So we help them jump that psychological hurdle and emotional hurdle. And the third is that we take products from good to great, because the end users, everyone in this room, if it were to be your product, you are sitting there with that entrepreneur, co-designing with them and helping them understand. So we have $10 million, but our offering is very commercial. And as such, we're on enterprise business development discussions with people. My ambition, and I'll feel ashamed if I haven't achieved this as the leader of this organisation, is that we are fully sustainable by 2021, only if the state government or any other government chooses to be associated because they're so proud of what it's done for industry. And that's definitely one of my KPIs, so I lie awake at night on that. But in a good way, I wouldn't have accepted the role. And our board, I think, is important for you to understand in terms of governance. So some of you may be aware of Raymond Spencer, who was the chair of the Economic Development Board. He was one of the leaders of this sector as an entrepreneur, saying this is a growth sector that defies any argument if only we stopped and thought about it differently. Professor Yuran Rules, who was a thinker in residence here and liked it so much he has stayed. He has deep living laboratory experience and international networks. Dr. Mike Runge, as ex-CEO of ACH, but also, a champion of older people. And Anne Skipper, who is the chair of Silverchain. So we have a small board right now. We're somewhat of a start-up, except we've had a 2-year ramp-up with the work of 1,000 people in a community. But that's very much a start-up board, and that board will expand and extend where needed. But right now, they're having more of the money spent on the projects. And I don't think Raymond would mind me saying this, but, he is doing this in an honorary capacity. So he didn't take money. He said it's too much the right thing to do and it can't afford to fail for South Australia.
Yes, hello. My name is Zaid. I work in the space of international trade. So my question in context to modern aging, and the skilled migrants. So means it's actually in the context to diversity. So the skilled migrants and the families who are moving into Australia or into South Australia, and they don't have that understanding of modern aging and how, the aged care, system and all those things they have not seen in their home, countries. So what is your strategy to educate to those young skilled migrant families or their, parents, how they can get mixed up into such kind of a this mix or this entire system? So like what your organization in context to when you talk to the government, both state and the federal, like are you doing anything special to enlighten those diversified groups and how they can get mixed into this kind of a modern aging culture? So that's what I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And, we exist for all. This movement isn't just about older people. We get this right. There's an intergenerational uplift, right, and an opportunity for school children and for young entrepreneurs. And also, included in that, we have a rich demographic society here in Australia, something I think we should be so proud of. And that includes our new migrants. A part of the advocacy program that I mentioned to you, we need to be bringing the evidence-based stories, and we'll be doing that through the media. So there'll be public events that we'll be having on education. We'll be profiling and highlighting people that are, that are living lives. And, I'm always smile when I see those photographs of older people. You've either got George Clooney and his equivalent on a beach walking hand in hand, or a desperately frail person in a blouse and a set of secretaries at the Rose Bush. And both of them are real, but there's a whole life of people in between that don't get reflected properly or even get reflected. So we're about that, and that includes our new migrants. Some of our work will be, we hope we find a sponsor around where English is a second language. Really interested in that. How people are learning, adult learning, because what a courage to move countries at any stage of life, but particularly if you're older, and then where it's not your native tongue, let alone your culture. And we're not setting, when we say modern aging, we're not a cult. We're not about one way of living. We're about allowing people to explore their best way of being.
Just one more question.
Thank you very much for your address. I thought it was very interesting, and I certainly had not been aware of the Global Centre for Modern Ageing Limited, so I found it very insightful. Probably addressing a Rotary group, you're probably aware, you don't need to look around this room very hard to realise a lot of ageing males in Rotary, and Adelaide Rotary Club reflects that, but it's a demographic across most of the Western world. We had a speaker here recently who was talking about the topic of suicide, and one of the issues was the percentage of suicides, contrary to popular belief, isn't around young males, 18 to 27 or whatever, and that's good news for the younger Rylarians, etc. But it's a group in the mid-50s, and then there's another group who are probably getting their late 70s on, who are probably losing a bit of purpose. And so that's getting into the psychology of things. And I guess the other reality, and I won't speak for anyone else in this room, but I'll certainly speak for me and put my hand up and say, if something happens with my wife, I'm going to be in all sorts of strife in actually even preparing things like meals, let alone dealing with the kitchen that you referred to. Do you want to talk a bit about the psychology of all of this? Because I think that's really important, and I certainly recognise, and I think we all do understand, that people are getting older and we're living longer lives, and modern medicine's helping that, modern diet's helping that. It's not helping the psychology of it. So you want to talk a bit about that, please?
Yes, I will, and just as you're speaking, Sir, there, I just was reminded of my father, and Mum and Dad had a 61-year marriage, and Mum died quite suddenly, and as sisters, we had 7 children in our family. In fact, growing up, I had 11 in our home. We had an orphan and grandma and the 7, kind of was gorgeous. It was really beautiful. It was a bit mad. But in seeing Dad and go through those next 4 years without Mum, and so I get this more than you can perhaps imagine today. But the importance of the resilience training and well-being, and this prevalence of older people, it's more in males than females actually. So in terms of the suicides, Not that you wish it on anyone, but it's an alarming statistic that affects the male gender in older age. So we are working with SAMRI and the Resilience Centre, and part of our work is we're not experts in that social frame, but we reach out to those who are. It's definitely a part of our strategy and our implementation, because it's what allows people to imagine themselves in a different life. And so it's unlocking their own permission within themselves and being in a supportive network. So we have mentors and coaches all through life, and what stops us needing a mentor or a coach at 70? I mean, absolutely nothing, right? Life throws you all sorts of curveballs, and so that's very much part of our work, and part of, I think, what we might need to extend to people who may choose to volunteer to be part of trialling and testing with us is as an emotional support and a strategy that allows them to do that. And we will be linked in more closely, but with the seniorpreneurs or the senior entrepreneurs, once again, that's a resilience is probably sometimes the one thing that, despite all of the other skills of wisdom and age has provided them, it's that permission to allow yourself. I don't know if I've answered your question there, but it's definitely at the core of all of us, and we won't be successful in our work if we don't make that the core of everything we do too.
Thank you very much, Julianne. It's a small token of our appreciation for you. And can I ask members to stand and show our appreciation for Julianne? Thank you.